Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of cold that settles into old bones and doesn't leave. Richmond, Virginia, East Side, a neighborhood where the streetlights flicker but never quite go out, where front porches sag under the weight of years nobody planned for, where the people who remain are the ones who never had the option to leave. At 6:41 in the morning, a 9-year-old girl stood alone in a kitchen that smelled like old wood and dish soap. Her name was Mila Scott. She opened the cabinet slowly, the way you open something when you already know what you'll find. 1 jar of peanut butter, nearly finished. 2 slices of bread, the hard ends, the ones everyone always leaves behind. She set them on the counter. She didn't sigh, she didn't complain. She simply began making the sandwich the way her grandmother had taught her, carefully, deliberately, like the making of it is its own kind of prayer. She wrapped it in a paper towel, folded the edges neat, put it in her backpack. Then she walked to the bedroom doorway, where her grandmother, Lorraine, sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on her work shoes with hands twisted by arthritis, hands that had worked 2 jobs for 11 years without a single word of self-pity. "Grandma," Mila said quietly, "I already ate." Lorraine looked up, studied her granddaughter's face for a moment, the way grandmothers do, reading what children don't say out loud. "You sure, baby?" "Yes, ma'am." She hadn't eaten, not a single bite. 6 blocks away, at a bus stop on the corner of Elm and Whitfield, a man sat slumped at the far end of a wooden bench like something the city had forgotten to clean up. He was 50 years old, though he looked older. His coat was too thin for the weather. His boots were worn through at the left heel. His eyes, when they were open, held the particular emptiness of a man who had stopped expecting anything from the day ahead. His name was Jack Thompson.
22 years, United States Navy SEAL. Deployments to places that don't appear on the evening news. Missions that don't get medals because they don't officially exist. He had carried brothers out of places no human being should ever have to enter. He had made decisions in the dark that he would spend the rest of his life answering for in the silence of 3 a.m. When he came home the last time, he came home to a house that felt like a stranger's. His marriage had quietly collapsed under the weight of years of absence. His daughter had grown up in photographs he wasn't in. He tried. For a while, he truly tried. But the war had followed him home the way wars do. Not with noise, with silence. With the inability to sit in a room full of people without feeling utterly, completely alone. He drifted. Not dramatically, just slowly, the way a boat with a small leak drifts, barely noticeable until one morning you look up and the shore is gone. The only constant was Rex, a German shepherd, 7 years old, with a broad chest and steady amber eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Rex had been with Jack through the final years of service and every hard year since. He didn't ask Jack to be better. He didn't grow frustrated or disappointed. He simply stayed. Every morning, every night, every 3 a.m. when Jack sat on whatever floor he was sleeping near and stared at nothing. Rex would put his head on Jack's knee and breathe slowly. And somehow, that was enough to get to morning. Mila arrived at the bus stop at 7:04. She sat at the opposite end of the bench from the man she hadn't noticed yet, adjusting the straps of her backpack, watching a pigeon walk in circles near the curb with the kind of focused attention that only children and very old people have time for. Rex noticed her first. He lifted his head from Jack's knee and looked at her, not with suspicion, not with aggression, simply with the calm, complete attention that dogs give to people they have already decided are safe. Mila felt his eyes on her and looked over. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. Then she smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that doesn't know it's beautiful. "Hey, boy," she said softly.
Rex stood slowly. He walked the length of the bench with quiet dignity. He stopped directly in front of her. And then, with the grace of an animal that understood things no one had taught him, he lowered his great head and rested it gently on her knee. Mila's hand moved to his fur without thinking. That was when Jack looked up, really looked. Not the glazed, unfocused look of a man moving through fog, but an actual look, present, direct, human. He saw a little girl in a thin coat with a backpack that was slightly too big for her shoulders, running her hand along his dog's neck like she had known him her whole life. Something in his chest moved, barely, but it moved. Mila reached into her backpack. She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, carefully, the way she had made it. She broke it in half. She held one half toward Rex. Rex didn't move, didn't sniff it, didn't take it. He turned his head and looked back at Jack, waiting. Mila followed the dog's gaze. She looked at the man at the other end of the bench for the first time, really looked, the way children look when they haven't yet learned not to. She saw the thin coat, the worn boots, the hollowness around his eyes. She didn't look away. She didn't feel uncomfortable. She simply understood, the way children sometimes do, with a clarity that takes adults decades to find. She placed the larger half of the sandwich in Jack's hands. Jack stared at it. His hands were trembling, not from cold. "Why would you give me this?" he said. His voice came out rough, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. Mila shrugged, already feeding her half to Rex. "You both look hungrier than me." No speech, no pity, no performance. Just the simple, devastating truth of a child who had so little and gave it anyway. Jack looked down at the sandwich in his shaking hands. He took one bite. Then something happened that hadn't happened in longer than he could remember. His eyes filled with tears, not because he was hungry, not because of the food.
Because someone had seen him. In 2 years of sleeping on benches and drifting through streets and becoming increasingly invisible to a world that had moved on without him, a 9-year-old girl with 2 slices of bread and a jar of almost empty peanut butter had looked straight at him and seen a human being worth feeding. He pressed his fist to his mouth and looked away so she wouldn't see him cry. Rex walked back to him and sat down at his feet, leaned against his leg, stayed. Across the street, behind the counter of a small grocery called Whitfield Corner Market, a man named Gerald Owens had been watching. Gerald was 63, Vietnam-era Army. He had run that store for 21 years, and he knew every face in that neighborhood, who was struggling, who was managing, who had given up. He had recognized Jack Thompson 3 weeks ago from a veterans support group he volunteered with on Thursday evenings. He had been trying to figure out how to reach him. He watched the little girl hand over her sandwich, watched Jack's shoulders shake, watched Rex lean in. Gerald picked up his phone. He didn't call the city, he didn't call a shelter. He called a man named Dale Briggs, former SEAL, Jack's teammate from 2009 to 2014, currently living 40 minutes north of Richmond. "Dale," Gerald said quietly, "I found Jack." What happened next did not move fast. It moved the way real brotherhood moves, steadily, quietly, without announcement. Dale made calls. Those men made calls. Within 36 hours, a network had been activated. Not a formal organization, not a government program, just men who had once made each other a promise in the dark of places they never talk about publicly. We don't leave our own behind. They found Jack 2 days later at the same bus stop. Dale sat down beside him, didn't make a speech, didn't offer pity, just sat there in the cold for 20 minutes until Jack finally said, "I don't know how to come back." Dale nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here." It was a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the sandwich, when Lorraine Scott opened her front door at 7:02 a.m. and stopped breathing for a moment. 12 men stood in a line on her porch and down her front steps, not in uniform, not in formation, just standing, still and steady, the way men stand when they mean something without needing to say it. Behind him, on the street, 2 pickup trucks were parked. The beds were full, groceries, supplies, boxes of food, a new space heater still in its box. At the front of the line stood a man Lorraine didn't recognize. Clean clothes, steady eyes, shaved, standing straight. Then from behind his leg, a German shepherd came forward. Mila, just coming down the hallway with her backpack, stopped. "Rex?" The dog crossed the room in 4 strides and pressed himself against her, tail moving so fast his whole back end swayed. Mila dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. "Rex," she whispered, like a secret. When she looked up, the man was crouching in front of her. She studied his face. The eyes were the same, that same deep, exhausted, finally present look from the bus stop, but something had changed in them. Something had come back. "Jack?" she said. He nodded. His jaw was tight. "You remembered me." She looked at him like that was the strangest question she had ever heard. "Of course I did." Lorraine stood in the doorway with one hand over her mouth. One of the veterans, a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples, stepped forward and removed his cap. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your granddaughter didn't just share a sandwich." He stopped, cleared his throat. "She brought one of ours back." Lorraine sat down on the nearest chair, not from weakness, from the weight of that sentence landing somewhere deep in her chest. She had worked 2 jobs for 11 years. She had raised Mila alone with arthritic hands and a refrigerator that needed replacing for 3 years. She had never asked anyone for anything because she didn't believe asking was something she was allowed to do. She sat in that chair and she put her face in her hands and she wept. The quiet, private kind of weeping that comes when someone is finally, after a very long time, allowed to put something down. The men moved around her like water. No fanfare, no cameras, groceries into the kitchen, the space heater assembled and placed in the living room. 2 men quietly examined the front steps and the porch railing without being asked. Another disappeared under the kitchen sink where a pipe had been slowly leaking for 4 months. Jack stayed with Mila. He reached into his coat pocket and held something out to her. A small wooden carving, a dog, shaped with careful, patient hands. The ears were exact. The posture was Rex's. "I made that," Jack said quietly, "while I was getting better." Mila took it with both hands, turned it over slowly, ran her thumb along the carved fur. "It looks just like him," she whispered. Jack nodded. He looked at her for a long moment, this small, quiet girl who had changed the entire direction of his life with half a sandwich and 3 words. "Mila," he said, "you didn't save me because you fed me." She looked up at him. "You saved me because you saw me." His voice broke on the last word, just slightly. "I had stopped believing anyone could." The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were small and real and quietly beautiful, which is the only way healing ever actually works. Jack got housing through a Veterans Assistance program Dale had connected him with. He started Thursday evening meetings, the same ones Gerald from the market volunteered with. Some mornings were still hard, some nights still dark, but he was no longer moving through them alone. Every Sunday, he and Rex came to Lorraine's house for dinner. Mila always saved Rex a small piece of whatever they were having, set beside her chair on the floor, as if he had always had a place there. Lorraine made enough food for whoever showed up. Sometimes it was 4 people, sometimes 6 when other veterans drifted in, drawn by the particular warmth of a house where they didn't have to explain themselves. Laughter came slowly, the way it does when people are learning to trust it again, but it came. At Mila's school, Gerald Owens and 2 veterans built a small bench in the corner of the schoolyard. They sanded it smooth and attached a simple wooden sign, hand-lettered, unpolished, honest. "Rex's Corner. Sit here if you need someone. Someone will come." Children used it more than any adult expected. Teachers began sitting there during recess when a student seemed to be carrying something too heavy. Word spread quietly throughout the neighborhood. People began checking on each other in small, unannounced ways. One sandwich had moved through an entire community like a stone dropped in still water, rings spreading outward, gently, without end. One evening in late November, Mila sat at Lorraine's table, eating a full dinner. Steam rising from a pot on the stove, Rex asleep under the table, his warm weight against her feet. Jack across from her, talking quietly with Lorraine about something that made her grandmother smile, a real smile, not a tired one. Mila looked at all of it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Because the morning she gave away the only food she had was the morning she made sure none of them would ever go hungry, not in body and not in soul, again. Real courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a thin coat and carries a backpack that's slightly too big. Sometimes it's 9 years old. Sometimes it's 3 quiet words at a cold bus stop and changes everything. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that kindness still matters, that no one should be invisible, that the smallest hands can carry the biggest hearts, then you belong here. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales, where every single story is a reminder that loyalty, courage, and human decency are still alive in this world, and they always will be, as long as people like Mila exist. This story teaches us that true kindness needs no audience and no perfect moment. It simply acts. Mila had almost nothing, yet she gave without hesitation, showing that generosity is not measured by what you have, but by what you choose to do with it. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest thing you can offer another person is not food, not money, not advice, but simply seeing them, really seeing them.
Jack had become invisible to the world, and one child's honest gaze brought him back to life. The story also shines a quiet light on the hidden struggles many veterans carry home from service, not visible wounds, but invisible ones. It gently encourages every viewer to check on the soldiers, the neighbors, the quiet strangers in their communities who may be disappearing slowly in plain sight. It shows that brotherhood is not an organization, it is a promise. And real community is not built by governments or programs. It is built by ordinary people who decide that showing up for each other is simply what human beings are supposed to do. And perhaps most powerfully, it proves that no act of kindness is ever too small to change a life. Half a sandwich, 3 words, one unremarkable morning, and from that, an entire world was made warmer.